I lived my entire life in a place that creates illusions.
At 70, I no longer have the strength or the desire to protect the secrets that nearly destroyed me. For decades, the world saw my face on screens, on magazine covers, under blazing spotlights that made everything look golden. But behind that glow lived a woman trembling in the dark, trying to hold herself together while her life, her real life, was quietly slipping away. People think they know my story. They think they know my beauty, my talent, my rise to fame. But they don't know the truth. They don't know the 4 affairs that almost ended my career. They don't know how danger can come dressed as passion. And they don't know how easily love can become a weapon in a place like Hollywood. Who loved me? Who used me? And why did I stay silent for 40 years? These questions have haunted me long after the cameras stopped rolling. I carried them like ghosts, shadows that followed me into every role, every marriage, every smile I gave to a world that adored a version of me I never fully recognized. People call me ethereal, haunting, untouchable. They never understood those weren't compliments. They were warnings. Because the truth is this: I was untouchable because I was afraid to be touched. I was haunting because I was haunted. And the beauty they worshipped was the same beauty that made me vulnerable to the men who claimed to love me, claimed to protect me, claimed to help me, when all they were doing was pulling me into their darkness. The affairs were intoxicating. They were thrilling. They were dangerous. Each one felt like destiny, like a story written for the screen. But the real script was far more brutal. Behind every kiss was a betrayal. Behind every promise was a threat. Behind every moment of passion was a shadow that grew until it swallowed pieces of me I never recovered. And then there was the 4th affair, the one with a man who didn't just love me or hurt me. He controlled me, my roles, my image, my future, my voice. He held my career between his fingers like a delicate flame he could extinguish whenever he pleased. At 70, I can finally say what I never dared to say. Those 4 affairs didn't just break my heart. They nearly ended my life. And tonight, for the first time, I am ready to tell the truth. I was not born into the glamorous world people associate with my name. Long before the cameras found me, before the awards, before the red carpets, and the whispered comparisons to legends, I was just a girl from Minnesota, quiet, awkward, terrified of being seen, and desperate to be understood. My childhood was a landscape of contradictions. A house filled with love but shadowed by volatility. A young girl with big dreams who felt small inside her own skin. I learned early how to disappear without leaving the room. I learned to survive by shrinking. But beauty, my unwanted inheritance, made shrinking impossible. People saw something in me long before I saw it in myself. Teachers said I belonged on stage. Strangers told me I looked like I'd stepped out of a dream. I didn't feel like a dream. I felt like a fracture searching for a shape. And yet, I followed the pull toward performing, hoping it would give me the identity I couldn't find anywhere else. When I arrived in New York, I was still trembling inside. I auditioned with a voice that quivered, hands that shook, and eyes that revealed more fear than confidence. But something about that fear translated as vulnerability, and vulnerability, when wrapped in beauty, becomes irresistible in this industry. Soon, the city that scared me began to open its doors, and I stepped through them without knowing how close they were slamming shut. Hollywood embraced me like a lover with a hidden agenda. It praised my softness. It worshipped my emotional depth. It adored the mystery I carried like an unspoken ache. What they called enigmatic, I called survival. What they called haunting, I called loneliness. My rise to fame was swift and intoxicating. The world watched as I floated across screens with a face that seemed made for tragedy. Directors told me I carried sadness beautifully. Critics called my performances otherworldly, as if I were a ghost drifting from frame to frame. I didn't realize the danger of such praise until it became the only thing people wanted from me. The higher I rose, the more the shadows clung to me. The panic attacks began. The sleepless nights stretched into weeks. The anxiety twisted itself into a companion I couldn't escape. Behind every applause was a voice reminding me, you are only as good as your beauty. You are only as valuable as your pain. I masked my fear with stillness. I masked my emptiness with elegance. I masked my confusion with roles that asked me to bleed on command. People thought I was powerful. People thought I was fearless. People thought I was in control. But no one knew the real story. And behind it all, I was falling apart. The first affair didn't begin like danger. It began like destiny. I call him the obsession because that is what he became, slowly, quietly, until his presence filled every corner of my life. He was a director, older, brilliant, the kind of man whose gaze could make you feel like the only person in the room. When he looked at me, I felt seen, not as a beauty, not as an icon, but as an artist. For a woman who had spent years being admired but not understood, that kind of attention was intoxicating. He cast me in a role that changed everything. On set, he hovered behind the camera like a shadow that knew my thoughts before I spoke them. "You're extraordinary," he whispered once, his voice brushing the back of my neck. I shivered, not from fear, but from recognition. Someone finally saw the depth I carried. Someone finally understood the sadness I hid. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. It didn't take long for our relationship to bleed beyond the set. We spent nights discussing art, pain, truth, words that felt bigger than both of us. He told me he had never met someone like me. He told me I made him feel alive in ways he'd forgotten. He told me we were inevitable, and I believed him. God, I believed him. But obsession always disguises itself as passion in the beginning. He wanted me everywhere he was. He needed to know where I went, who I spoke to, what I felt. At first, it seemed romantic, attention mistaken for affection, until it wasn't. One evening, after a long day of shooting, I told him I needed a night to myself. He stared at me with a kind of disbelief that felt colder than anger. "A night to yourself?" he repeated. "Why would you need that?" "Because I was tired. Because I was overwhelmed. Because I was losing the pieces of myself I had fought so hard to build." But I didn't say any of that. I just looked down. He stepped closer, lifting my chin with his fingers. His voice softened, but the softness was a trap. "You don't need space, Jessica. You need direction. You need someone who knows you better than you know yourself." For a moment, I felt the room tilt. Direction, control disguised as guidance. But I stayed, not because I was blind, but because I was lonely. Because I confused intensity with devotion. Because the world adored the myth of me, but he, at least I thought, adored the woman beneath it. The breaking point came months later, when he tried to intervene in a role I wanted, a role he believed was beneath me, wrong for my image, dangerous for my career. When I refused to let him decide for me, something in his eyes changed. The warmth vanished, the admiration curdled, and suddenly, the man who claimed to love me more than anyone became the man who tried to sabotage me silently, inch by inch. The first dangerous affair taught me a truth I wasn't ready to face. Some men don't love you. They love the power they have over you. And by the time I finally pulled away, I realized his obsession had carved a wound in me I would spend years trying to heal. If the first affair consumed me slowly, the second one struck like lightning. I call him the firestorm because he arrived with a heat that felt impossible to resist. Wild, ferocious, unpredictable. He wasn't a director. He wasn't someone who controlled scripts or studios. He was an actor, a man who lived off adrenaline, who treated passion like oxygen, who burned so brightly it was impossible not to be drawn in. We met on a set far from home, surrounded by dust, heat, and a script that demanded vulnerability. But it wasn't the script that disarmed me. It was him. The way he laughed, too loudly. The way he watched, too intensely. The way he lived, too carelessly, as if consequences were myths designed for weaker people. On our first afternoon together, he leaned against my trailer door and said, "You're afraid of yourself, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a strike, and it landed deep. Something about him terrified me, and something about that terror pulled me closer. Our connection was immediate and explosive. We argued like lovers before we ever touched. We flirted like enemies who didn't understand why they wanted to devour each other. Every moment with him felt like standing on the edge of something dangerous. But danger can feel like truth when you've spent your life being careful. When we finally kissed, it felt like the world tilted off its axis. He tasted like rebellion. I tasted like surrender. But passion, when rooted in insecurity, grows teeth. He wanted all of me. Every thought, every glance, every breath. If someone else on set made me laugh, his jaw tightened. If I worked late, he accused me of hiding. If I seemed distant, he demanded to know who had gotten into my head. "I can't lose you," he said once, gripping my arms just a little too tightly. "You don't have me," I whispered, but he didn't listen. His jealousy ignited fights that left me shaking. He apologized with grand gestures, flowers, promises, nights of desperate tenderness that felt like apologies carved into skin. And every time, I believed him. Because storms don't calm, they reset. But the worst part wasn't his temper. It was mine. He awakened a version of me I didn't recognize. A woman who raised her voice. A woman who slammed doors. A woman who mistook chaos for connection because stillness felt too empty. The affair didn't stay quiet. Word spread. The studio grew nervous. Our chemistry threatened the film. Our volatility threatened my career. Producers pulled me aside and warned me that I was losing control, that he was poison to my image, that Hollywood would not tolerate a woman who burned publicly. They didn't understand the truth. I was already burning. The breaking point came on a night thick with tension. We argued until our voices cracked. He said I made him crazy. I said he made me cruel. When he walked out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, something inside me broke with it. He didn't return, and I didn't chase him. The second dangerous affair left me scorched. Alive, but only in the way burned land is alive. The firestorm taught me this. Passion can feel like salvation when you mistake it for love. But in the end, it only leaves ash. The third affair was the quietest, the softest, and somehow the most devastating. I call him the beautiful threat because nothing about him looked dangerous at first. He wasn't volatile like the firestorm. He wasn't controlling like the obsession. He was everything they weren't, gentle, patient, observant in a way that felt comforting, even healing. But danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. We met at a charity event, one of the rare nights I felt too tired to pretend, but too obligated to decline. He approached me with a humility I hadn't seen in years. "You look like someone who needs a quieter room," he said. And he was right. I followed him to a balcony where the noise softened, the air cooled, and for a moment, I felt like a woman again. Not an actress, not a symbol, not a myth. He didn't flirt. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He made space for me, and I mistook space for safety. We began seeing each other privately. Dinners at small restaurants where no one recognized us. Walks along dimly lit streets where I didn't have to hide my exhaustion. Coffee in the morning sunlight where he listened more than he spoke. I felt myself exhale around him in ways I hadn't in years. One night, after a simple meal, he took my hand and said, "You deserve peace." Peace. The word felt like a promise. But promises can be fragile things, especially when built on illusions. Slowly, his gentleness sharpened. His patience thinned. His encouragement became expectation. He started saying things like, "I like you when you're calm. You're softer when you don't work so much. I prefer you without all the Hollywood noise." At first, I took it as affection. Then I realized it was a desire for me to stay small, for me to stay dependent, for me to remain the version of myself I became only when I was tired, quiet, and dimmed. He didn't want the fire in me. He wanted the ashes. His affection tightened around me like a silk thread, soft enough not to leave marks, strong enough to restrict my movement. If I pulled away, he grew distant. If I leaned in, he drew closer, wrapping me in sweetness that felt more like restraint than love. The breaking point came on a night when he looked at me, not with love, but with possession hidden beneath tenderness. "You're so much easier when you're not trying to be the Jessica Lange everyone talks about," he said. And in that moment, I understood. He didn't love me. He loved the version of me that required nothing from him. The version of me that was quiet, dented, tired. The version formed not by truth, but by trauma. When I ended it, he didn't shout. He simply smiled, sadly, knowingly. As I expected, he murmured, "Women like you never choose peace." But he was wrong. I didn't leave because I rejected peace. I left because I realized the peace he offered required me to disappear. The third dangerous affair taught me this. Sometimes the gentlest man is the one who slowly erases you. The fourth affair wasn't born from passion or affection. It was born from fear, from pressure, from a system designed to trap women like me in golden cages. I call him the puppeteer because that is exactly what he was. The man who held the strings of my career, my public image, and, for a time, my sense of worth. He was one of the most powerful studio bosses in Hollywood, a man whose decisions shaped decades of cinema. He didn't need charm. He didn't need beauty. He had something far more intoxicating: control. Control over careers. Control over narratives. Control over which women rose and which women vanished. And he knew I was vulnerable. He knew I was tired. He knew I was afraid of losing everything. He approached me under the guise of mentorship. "You have the kind of talent studios fight for," he said, smiling the practiced smile of a man who had rehearsed sincerity more times than I had rehearsed lines. "Let me help you protect it." I didn't see the trap. Not at first. He gave me roles. He shielded me from bad scripts, from hostile press, from directors who wanted to exploit my fragility. He made me feel safe in a world that had chewed me up more than once. But safety offered by a powerful man is rarely free. It began with small requests. Interviews he wanted me to accept, events he needed me to attend, stories he wanted me to lean into. Then the requests became rules. The rules became demands. And the demands became quiet threats whispered in rooms with closed doors. "You're not ready for this role. This director won't know how to handle you. You need me more than you realize." The worst part wasn't what he said. It was how calmly he said it, as if he weren't taking pieces of my autonomy, but simply rearranging them. One afternoon, after I expressed interest in a project he didn't approve of, he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "Jessica, stars don't make decisions. Studios do, and I'm the studio." The words hit me like a slap. I realized then that he didn't desire me. He desired ownership, not my body, of my future. Our affair, if you can call it that, was not emotional. It was transactional, a slow entanglement where I mistook gratitude for connection, and he mistook power for intimacy. When I tried to pull away, he tightened the strings. Suddenly, opportunities disappeared. Offers dried up. Reporters began asking questions that seemed planted by invisible hands. He didn't need to ruin me loudly. He could destroy me quietly. The breaking point came during a meeting where he looked at me with cold amusement and said, "You belong to Hollywood, and as long as I'm here, you belong to me." That was the moment I understood the full truth. He had never been protecting me. He had been possessing me. Leaving him wasn't dramatic. It was silent, a slow extraction from a web I hadn't realized I was tangled in. But even after I escaped, the damage lingered. The roles I lost, the confidence he crushed, the years I spent rebuilding myself from the strings he had pulled. The fourth dangerous affair taught me this. The most dangerous man is the one who believes your life is his to orchestrate. The final truth is the one I kept buried the deepest. Not because it was shameful, but because it was sacred. After the affairs that consumed me, after the men who broke pieces of me I didn't know were fragile, there was one man whose love didn't destroy me. It nearly saved me, and that, somehow, was the most dangerous thing of all. He came into my life quietly, without spectacle or intention. He wasn't a director. He wasn't an actor. He wasn't someone who needed me to shine so he could stand in my glow. He was simply a man who saw me, truly saw me, at a time when I had forgotten how to be seen. I call him the one who stayed in the shadows, because while the world watched me fall apart, he stayed close enough for me to feel his presence, but far enough not to frighten me. The first time he looked at me, He didn't see Jessica Lange, the actress. He saw the tremor in my hands. He saw the exhaustion behind my smile. He saw the woman who had survived too much and trusted too little. "You look tired," he said the first night we spoke, his voice soft, unthreatening. "I am," I whispered back, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to pretend otherwise. We never planned to fall in love. It happened in the spaces between words, in the quiet moments when I wasn't performing, when he wasn't expecting anything from me. He didn't try to shape me, or tame me, or study me. He didn't use my vulnerability against me. Instead, he held it gently, like something that deserved care. With him, I laughed. With him, I rested. With him, I remembered who I was before the world began carving pieces off me. But love, when you've been wounded long enough, becomes terrifying. And I was terrified. Terrified that he would leave like the others. Terrified that he would stay and see the darkness I still carried. Terrified that if I leaned on him, I would lose what little of myself I had managed to protect. One evening, he touched my face with a tenderness I wasn't used to. "You don't have to be strong with me," he said. I looked away. I don't know how to be anything else. And that was the truth. He wanted a woman who could let herself be loved. I was a woman still learning how not to drown. The end didn't come with anger or betrayal. It came with a quiet understanding. A moment where we both realized love wasn't enough to heal the wounds carved by years of fear and survival. He held me one last time, his breath trembling against my shoulder. "I hope someday you learn to stay," he whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. The greatest tragedy wasn't losing him. It was knowing that he was the only man who ever loved the real me. And I pushed him away because I didn't believe I deserved what he offered. This is the truth I never spoke. The truth I protected out of fear and shame and longing. And this is the truth I can only tell now, at 70. There comes a moment when the weight of everything you've carried finally becomes too heavy to bear. For me, it didn't arrive during a scandal or on a set or in front of cameras waiting to capture the crack in my smile. It came quietly, creeping in like nightfall, settling into the corners of my life until all the light faded. I remember the night it happened. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. I walked into my living room, the walls lined with awards, framed posters, photographs from decades of performances. These were the artifacts of a life that looked triumphant from the outside. But as I stood there, surrounded by the relics of who I used to be, I felt a hollow ache spreading through me like a slow poison. I reached out to touch one of the posters, my younger self staring back with a confidence I never truly had. And something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just broke. My knees gave out. I sank to the floor, my breath stuttering in my chest. I pressed my hand against my heart as if I could steady it, but it raced faster, wild and erratic, like it was trying to escape me. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, though no one was there to hear it. The tears came then, hot, violent, unstoppable. I cried for the girl I had been, for the woman I became, for the pieces of myself I had given away to men who mistook my softness for surrender, for the years I spent performing pain so convincingly that I no longer recognized where the acting ended and the truth began. I cried for the love I didn't know how to hold, for the life I didn't know how to protect, for the woman I didn't know how to save. I felt like a ghost. I said into the empty room, the words trembling on my tongue, a ghost in my own life. It was true. I had spent so long disappearing to survive that I no longer remembered how to exist. The world forgot me, I whispered next. But the truth was harsher. I had forgotten myself first. The panic tightened in my chest. My breath came in shallow gasps. The room spun. I curled into myself, wrapping my arms around my body like I could keep the fragments from scattering. I wanted someone to find me, to hold me, to tell me I wasn't alone. But no one was coming. Not the obsession, not the firestorm, not the beautiful thread, not the man I loved and lost. Only me. And on that floor, trembling, sobbing, unraveling, I realized something I had spent a lifetime avoiding. If I didn't save myself, no one ever would. Healing didn't arrive with applause. It didn't burst into my life like a revelation or hand me back all the pieces I'd lost. It came gradually, quietly, like a tide returning to shore after years of violent storms. I didn't know I was healing at first. I only knew I was tired of breaking. The morning after my collapse, I woke on the living room floor. The room still dim, the world still heavy. But something inside me had shifted, almost imperceptibly. A whisper instead of scream, a breath instead of a sob, a small, stubborn thought. I'm still here. It wasn't strength, not yet, but it was the beginning. I stopped running. From my past, from my pain, from the woman I had been trying to outrun for decades. I let myself sit with the discomfort, the shame, the grief. I let myself remember the girl from Minnesota who once believed she wasn't enough. I let myself embrace the actress who carried entire films on trembling shoulders. I let myself mourn the loves that shattered me and the love I pushed away. I forgave myself slowly, painfully, tenderly. I started choosing differently, not for Hollywood, not for survival, for me. I took roles that allowed me to breathe rather than break. I surrounded myself with people who saw my humanity, not my image. I said no more often, first as a whisper, then as a truth. And little by little, the woman I had lost began returning to me in fragments, like pieces of a mirror I no longer feared. One afternoon, I stood in my garden, the sun warm against my skin, the air smelling faintly of earth and renewal. I closed my eyes and felt a stillness that wasn't emptiness. It was peace, my peace. Not the fragile peace promised by men who wanted to mold me. Not the conditional peace Hollywood demanded, but a peace built from survival and honesty. I realized then that I no longer needed the validation I once begged for. I no longer needed the affection that came with conditions. I no longer needed to be the woman men projected their fantasies onto. I only needed to be myself, the woman who endured, the woman who rose, the woman who now chose herself. Finally, completely. For the first time in decades, I could look at my reflection without flinching, not because I saw beauty or perfection, but because I saw truth. A woman who had been broken, bent, controlled, abandoned, used, and yet she was still standing. At 70, I am not the Jessica Lange the world once adored. I am something better, something truer, something real. Pain made me stronger, loss made me wiser, and survival made me whole. I'm still here, and now, my story, every wound, every shadow, every rebirth, is yours.